Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and today's video I am going to share how I get myself around the fact that I like Humbrol acrylic paints but I don't like their dropper bottles. So hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about how I'm getting around a problem that Humbrol have created for me recently. Now, I'm a fan of Humbrol paints. I know a lot of people don't use Humbrol acrylics, and a lot of people have moved away from Humbrol enamels, but personally I never really have. And I find, even though I'm a big user of other acrylic brands, Vallejo and MIG particularly, I keep using Humbrol acrylics, and what I find is occasionally you can get a bit of a dud paint, but I find that with all other paint systems too, in fairness. But generally I find that Humbrol acrylics are quite thick paints, and as a result I get better, longer coverage from a thin down Humbrol paint than I will do another paint. And part of the reason for that is that a lot of companies put their paint into dropper bottles, and to be able to use the paint from a dropper bottle, they thin the paint. So the paint is often pre-thinned. Now if you think about Vallejo, for example, Vallejo have two paint systems, both in dropper bottles, one designed for the airbrush and one designed for the paintbrush. And even though the paint for the airbrush is thinner, the paint for the paintbrush has also been thinned to allow you to get it out of the bottle. Now, when Humbrol jumped on the bandwagon of dropper bottles, they didn't appear to reformulate their paint to allow it to get through a dropper bottle. So historically, you probably got their paint in something like this, or this, or this. And to be honest, all of these work for Humbrol paints because they all have one thing in common, which is I can take the lid off and I can get to the paint to give it a good mix up. Humbrol paints always need a good mix up, and because they're quite viscous, quite often they're quite thick, and you're taking out a dollop of paint and adding thinner to it, and then you've got a lovely paint that will give you great coverage. The problem with these dropper bottles is you can't get in and mix it. Now on the back it tells you to shake it for 45 seconds, but if you look at this one, that is completely separated in there, and I could be honest, I'll shake that for a month of Sundays and that isn't gonna mix. So what do? Get frustrated, decide that I'm not using Humbrol paints anymore and move away from them? I've got to be honest, I considered that option. I like my Vallejo and MIG paints, and one of my options was just to stop buying Humbrol acrylics and use an alternative paint system. But it was bothering me that I was being forced away from a paint system that I like because I can't get it out of the bottle it came in. Now, Humbrol have a Generation 2 acrylic coming out. So that's clearly a reformulation, and maybe they've taken into account the fact that you can't get their paint out of their dropper bottles. I'm not sure. I know one or two people have had pre-sale samples to play with. I'm not one of them, so I have no idea. But right now, I find it really frustrating that their paint is in these dropper bottles, and they've announced that they're only going to be supplying paint in the dropper bottles. So you could use an empty paint jar and decant it into that. You just have to be careful that you've got the volume right. This is a 10 milliliter bottle, and this is a 14 milliliter bottle. So you're not going to get all of your Humbrol paint into one Tamiya bottle, for example. But the other bigger issue with using recycled bottles is that if you're anything like me, you buy paint at a rate greater than you finish paint. And so you tend to have an ever-growing inventory of paint, and the number of paint bottles you're actually cleaning and saying, yeah, I've finished with, it gets left, is relatively small. So what's the solution? For me, the solution is to take the paint out of that dropper bottle and put it into an airtight paint container, something like these. So these are empty paint pots, and they come, I've ordered 20 of them from a company in the UK. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they come with the sealed lid separate from the bottle. This is exactly the same bottle that Humbrol used to use when they gave you 18.2 millilitres. So that means that I've got a bottle that I know will take all of that. In fact, if I'm inclined, I've got enough space to add thinner. I generally don't do that because I want different thicknesses of paint for different jobs, so I don't personally pre-thin. But other people do, and you would have space in there to do it. And while you're at it, if you're going to decant your paint out of a dropper bottle and put it in a new paint pot, you might as well help the stirring process, because you know you've got to stir a Humbrol paint, so we might as well put a mixing bead in. Then, once you've put your paint in, you can put your top on, rip off the seal like you normally do, and you've got a proper paint pot for your paint. Now, if you don't like these because they have a tendency to drip and get paint everywhere, what you can do is just run a knife through the top of the hinge there, and then you can take the whole lid off, which I generally tend to do if I remember. I'm not remembered on this one. So these cost me just under £14 delivered for 20 bottles. Now I have just over a dozen of these that I need to sort. So this is going to give me some spares. That's cheaper than buying empty paint containers or airtight containers that are 15 millilitres typically on places like eBay or Amazon, because I've gone direct to the manufacturer. Now in this case, the manufacturer is a company that I've used on a professional basis, so I know that they're a good manufacturer with good manufacturing standards. And in the UK, the company is called Ampulla, Ampulla. I will leave a link in the comments below. So these 20 items, they've taken about 6 days to get delivered from point of order. You can order them online. I don't know if they ship internationally, but if you were to Google 15 milliliter airtight empty paint pots, you may well find a manufacturer in your country. So for me, this is my solution. I am going to take my paints. I am going to, see, the paint lid has dried on. I'm going to take my paints, which leak everywhere, as you can see, in the top and all around the top, and then that dries onto the lid. But I'm going to decant all of these paints into empty bottles. I can then label them up with a label on there and give it the name and the colour and everything that's on that label. In fact, I may even be able to re-stick the label with a bit of luck and plop it on, and that's job done. So that's going to save me a lot of heartache, and it's going to save me from having to move away from a paint system that I like. So I'm going to be getting on with doing that over the next few days, decanting paint into new paint pots, labeling them up, and then getting them back into my paint storage rack. And I will be a much happier bunny, because actually most of my Humbrol acrylics are already in these paint pots. I have some of these, but most of them are in these. So, happy days. Thanks for looking in. I hope that was in some way helpful. And if, like me, you've been struggling with the new dropper bottle, you don't have to worry anymore. I've given you a solution. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your modelling, and I'll see you very soon. How do they think paint that thick that won't come out of the open neck of a dropper bottle will get through the tiny little nozzle? Humbrol, what are you doing?